Dust devils danced across the parched land, mimicking the turmoil brewing within Sarah's heart. The wagon wheels groaned a mournful song, a soundtrack to the arduous journey west. 50 minutes, give or take, was all the time it would take to tell the tale of how her life took a turn so dark, so desperate. She clutched the worn fabric of her bonnet, shielding her face from the relentless sun, but nothing could shield her from the resentment radiating from her husband's family. They had painted a picture of golden fields and endless opportunities in California. Freedom, they said, waited just beyond the horizon. But freedom felt a million miles away, buried beneath the weight of their scorn. Silas, her husband, was a good man, if a little weak. He saw her kindness, her resilience, but he was beholden to his parents, trapped in their web of bitterness. Pa and Ma, as everyone called them, saw Sarah as nothing more than another mouth to feed, another body taking up space in their cramped wagon. They constantly reminded her of her place, which was somewhere between the cooking fire and the chamber pot. Their daughters, Agnes and Martha, echoed their parents' sentiments, adding their own petty cruelties. Sarah had tried to ignore it, to focus on the promise of a new life. She helped with the chores, nursed Silas through a fever, and even attempted to befriend the sour-faced women. But her efforts were met with cold shoulders and sharper words. She was an outsider, a reminder of their son's poor judgment. Soon, however, their dislike would transform into something far more sinister, something that would change the course of her life forever. The tension in the wagon was thicker than the dust swirling around them. It wasn't just the everyday squabbles of the family crammed together for months on end. This was a deeper, more insidious kind of animosity directed solely at Sarah. Pa would constantly find fault with her cooking, claiming she used too much salt or not enough. Ma would scrutinize her sewing, pointing out every uneven stitch. Agnes and Martha would giggle and whisper behind her back, their eyes darting to her with thinly veiled contempt. Even Silas, bless his heart, seemed to shrink in their presence. He'd offer a weak smile or a fleeting touch, but he never dared to openly defend her. He was a good son, perhaps too good. He'd been raised to respect his parents' wishes, and Sarah was beginning to suspect that their wishes didn't include her. One evening, as they sat around the campfire, the tension reached a boiling point. Pa, fueled by cheap whiskey, began to rant about the cost of their journey. "Every mouth we feed is another dollar gone," he slurred, his eyes fixed on Sarah. "And some mouths ain't worth the feed in." Ma chimed in, her voice dripping with venom. "She ain't pulled her weight since day one. Just sits around looking pretty." Sarah bit back a retort, her knuckles white as she gripped her tin cup. She knew that arguing would only make things worse. But the words stung, each one a tiny barb piercing her skin. She was tired of being the scapegoat, the target of their constant disapproval. She longed for a moment of peace, a glimmer of kindness. But in this family, kindness was a rare and precious commodity, reserved only for those who shared their blood. And Sarah, she was beginning to realize, would never be one of them. The next day dawned hot and unforgiving, the sun beating down on the weary travelers. As they broke camp, a lone figure appeared on the horizon, riding a dusty horse. He was a traveling salesman, his wagon piled high with goods, everything from patent medicines to brightly colored fabrics. He was a welcome distraction, at least for a little while. He set up shop near their camp, his booming voice echoing across the plains as he hawked his wares. Agnes and Martha were immediately drawn to the ribbons and trinkets, their eyes wide with longing. Ma lingered near the bolts of fabric, running her calloused fingers over the smooth textures. Even Pa seemed intrigued by the bottles of miracle elixir he claimed could cure anything from a toothache to consumption. Sarah, however, remained wary. There was something about the salesman's slick smile and shifty eyes that made her uneasy. He seemed to be sizing them up, assessing their worth. She watched as he engaged Pa in a hushed conversation, their heads bent together, their voices low and conspiratorial. She couldn't hear what they were saying, but she could sense the shift in the air, the subtle change in Pa's demeanor. He seemed excited, Later that evening, after the salesman had packed up his wagon and ridden off into the sunset, Sarah noticed Pa and Ma exchanging knowing glances. Agnes and Martha were unusually quiet, their earlier excitement replaced by a strange, almost nervous energy. Something was brewing, something she didn't understand, but she knew, with a chilling certainty, that it wasn't good. The salesman's visit had planted a seed, and she feared the poisonous fruit it would bear. That night, sleep eluded Sarah. The image of Pa and the salesman huddled together haunted her. She tossed and turned in her bedroll, the rough canvas scratching against her skin. Finally, she couldn't stand it anymore. She slipped out of the wagon, the cool night air a welcome relief against her fevered skin. The campfire had died down to glowing embers, casting long, dancing shadows across the clearing. She could hear the soft snores of her husband and the rhythmic breathing of the others in the wagons. She crept towards Pa and Ma's wagon, drawn by an irresistible urge to uncover their secret. She pressed her ear against the canvas, straining to hear. At first, there was only silence. Then, she heard Ma's voice, low and raspy. "Are you sure about this, Pa? It don't feel right." "It's the only way, woman," Pa replied, his voice gruff. "We're running out of money, and she ain't worth nothing to us. Besides," he added with a cruel chuckle, "she'll be well taken care of." Sarah's blood ran cold. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest, a frantic drumbeat against her ribs. She strained to hear more, her mind racing to make sense of their cryptic words. But Silas, Ma hesitated. What will he say? He'll get over it, Pa scoffed. He's a fool for that girl, but he'll understand. We're doing what's best for the family. Then, Sarah heard the salesman's name mentioned, followed by the name of a town she vaguely recognized, a town known for its saloons and its other establishments. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. They were talking about her. They were planning to sell her to a brothel. The realization hit her like a physical blow, leaving her gasping for air, her world tilting on its axis. Betrayal, cold and sharp, pierced Sarah's heart. The people who were supposed to be her family, who had sworn to care for her, were plotting to sell her like livestock. The trust she had placed in them shattered into a million pieces, leaving her vulnerable and alone. She stumbled back to her wagon, her mind reeling, her body numb. She lay awake for the rest of the night, staring up at the canvas roof, the stars mocking her with their distant indifference. Silas slept soundly beside her, oblivious to the monstrous betrayal unfolding around him. She couldn't tell him, not yet. She didn't know who to trust, who was in on the scheme. The next morning, the in-laws acted as if nothing had happened. They smiled, offered her coffee, and made small talk about the weather. The hypocrisy was sickening. Sarah forced herself to play along, masking her fear and disgust with a carefully constructed facade. She knew she had to be smart. She had to be careful. One wrong move could cost her everything. Throughout the day, she observed them closely, searching for clues, trying to understand the full extent of their plan. She noticed Pa's sneaking glances at her, a calculating glint in his eyes. Ma seemed unusually solicitous, offering her extra help with the chores. Agnes and Martha continued to whisper and giggle, but now their laughter seemed laced with malice. As the days passed, the tension grew unbearable. Sarah felt like a hunted animal, constantly looking over her shoulder, anticipating the moment when they would spring their trap. She knew she couldn't wait for them to make their move. She had to take control, to find a way to protect herself. Her survival depended on it. Sarah knew she couldn't run. Where'd she go? The wilderness was vast and unforgiving, and she had no money, no supplies, and no one to turn to. Silas, blinded by his loyalty to his family, would never believe her. Law enforcement, if she could even find any, would likely dismiss her claims against a respectable family. She was trapped, but she refused to be a victim. A flicker of defiance ignited within her, fueled by desperation and a primal instinct to survive. If they wanted to treat her like an animal, she would show them just how dangerous a cornered animal could be. She would not go quietly. She would not be sold. Her grandmother, A woman of the woods with a deep understanding of nature's secrets had taught her many things. Among them was the knowledge of plants, which ones could heal and which ones could kill. Sarah remembered her grandmother's warnings about the deadly nightshade that grew in the shadowed ravines and the poisonous hemlock that thrived near the creek. At the time, she had dismissed it as old wives' tales. Now, that knowledge was her only weapon. She began to spend her days foraging, ostensibly gathering herbs for cooking. But instead, she searched for the plants her grandmother had warned her about. She collected them carefully, hiding them in a small pouch she kept tucked away in her wagon. She knew what she was planning was dangerous, perhaps even evil, but she saw no other way out. It was her life against theirs, and she was determined to survive. The fear was still there, but it was now accompanied by a chilling resolve. She would not be a lamb led to the slaughter. She would be the wolf in sheep's clothing. Each day, Sarah ventured further from the camp, her basket swinging innocently at her side. The in-laws, preoccupied with their own schemes, paid little attention to her movements. She knew the risks she was taking. If they discovered her secret, her life would be forfeit. But the thought of what they planned to do to her spurred her on. She sought out the distinctive leaves of the nightshade, its berries gleaming like dark jewels. She carefully avoided touching the plant directly, remembering her grandmother's warnings about its potent poison. She used a small stick to break off the stems, placing them in her pouch with a grim satisfaction. Near the creek, she found the hemlock, its delicate white flowers hiding a deadly secret. She knew that even a small amount of the plant could be fatal. She harvested the leaves and stems, her hands trembling slightly. She wasn't a murderer, not by nature, but they had given her no choice. Back at the camp, she meticulously dried the plants, grinding them into a fine powder with a small stone. She mixed the powder with other herbs and spices, masking its bitter taste and smell. She worked in secret, her heart pounding with each movement, praying that she wouldn't be discovered. She knew that the stew she planned to make would be her most important meal. She started the fire, the flames crackling and spitting beneath the heavy iron pot. She chopped vegetables, her movements precise and deliberate, each slice a small act of defiance. She added chunks of tough beef, the only meat they had left, and simmered it slowly in water, stirring occasionally with a wooden spoon. The aroma of the stew filled the air, a deceptive scent that masked the deadly secret it contained. When the stew was nearly ready, she reached for the small pouch hidden beneath her apron. Her hands trembled as she opened it, revealing the mixture of dried herbs and spices. She took a deep breath, steeling her resolve. This was it. There was no turning back. With a steady hand, she sprinkled the poison into the stew, stirring it in thoroughly to ensure it was evenly distributed. She watched as the powder dissolved, disappearing into the thick broth, its presence undetectable. Her face was a mask of grim determination, her eyes cold and hard. She ladled the stew into bowls, setting them out on the rough wooden table. She called the family to dinner, her voice betraying none of the turmoil raging within her. As they gathered around the table, their faces etched with hunger, Sarah watched them closely, her heart pounding in her chest. Pa offered a gruff blessing. Mom muttered a perfunctory amen, and Agnes and Martha giggled nervously. Silas smiled at her, oblivious to the deadly meal she had prepared. The stage was set. The curtain was about to rise. The first spoonfuls went down without a hitch. Pa smacked his lips, his eyes closed in satisfaction. "Not bad, Sarah," he grunted, a rare compliment. "Best meal we've had in weeks." Ma nodded in agreement. "You've outdone yourself, girl." She even offered Sarah a small smile, a gesture that sent a chill down Sarah's spine. Agnes and Martha, always eager to please their parents, chimed in with their own praise. "It's delicious, Sarah," Agnes said, her mouth full. "The best stew ever," Martha added, giggling. Even Silas seemed to enjoy the meal, his brow furrowed in concentration as he chewed each mouthful. He looked up at Sarah, his eyes filled with gratitude. "This is really good, Sarah," he said, squeezing her hand. "Thank you." Sarah forced a smile, her stomach churning with guilt and fear. She watched the meat, her eyes darting from face to face, searching for any sign of discomfort. But there was nothing, not yet. They were all enjoying the stew, oblivious to the poison slowly coursing through their veins. As the meal progressed, the conversation flowed easily. The tension that had been hanging over them for weeks seemingly dissipated. They talked about their plans for the future, their hopes and dreams for their new life in California. They laughed, they reminisced, they shared stories. It was as if they were a real family, a loving family. Sarah felt a pang of regret, a moment of doubt. Had she made the right decision? Was there another way? But then she remembered their betrayal, their cruelty, their willingness to sacrifice her for their own selfish gain. The doubt quickly vanished, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. She had done what she had to do, and now she could only wait. The first signs were subtle. Pa started complaining of a stomach ache, clutching his abdomen and groaning. Ma seemed unusually pale, her face slick with sweat. Agnes and Martha grew restless, their earlier laughter replaced by a nervous fidgeting. Silas, however, seemed unaffected, his constitution apparently stronger than the rest of his family. As the evening wore on, the symptoms worsened. Pa began to vomit, his body racked with violent spasms. Ma complained of blurred vision and a burning sensation in her throat. Agnes and Martha developed severe headaches, their faces contorted in pain. Sarah watched them, her heart pounding in her chest, a mixture of fear and satisfaction warring within her. She knew that the poison was working, that their bodies were slowly shutting down. But she also knew that their suffering was far from over. She pretended to be concerned, offering them water and soothing words. She helped them to their beds, tucking them in and feigning sympathy. But inside, she was bracing herself for what was to come. Throughout the night, their moans and cries echoed through the camp. Pa thrashed in his bed, his body convulsing uncontrollably. Ma gasped for breath, her eyes wide with terror. Agnes and Martha whimpered and sobbed, begging for relief. Sarah remained awake, listening to their suffering, her mind racing, her conscience struggling to cope with the weight of her actions. She knew that she was responsible for their pain, that she had brought this upon them. But she also knew that she had done what she had to do to survive. She had protected herself from a fate worse than death. And now, she had to live with the consequences. By morning, Pa, Ma, Agnes, and Martha were all delirious, their bodies ravaged by the poison. Silas, frantic with worry, insisted on sending for a doctor. Sarah, knowing that it was a futile effort, reluctantly agreed. She knew that no doctor, no matter how skilled, would be able to diagnose their condition. The poison she had used was rare and untraceable, its effects mimicking a variety of common ailments. Silas rode for hours, finally returning with a weary-looking doctor in tow. The doctor, a portly man with a kind face and a worn-out medical bag, examined each of the patients in turn, his brow furrowing in concern. He asked questions about their symptoms, their diet, and their recent activities. Sarah answered truthfully, carefully omitting any mention of the poisonous plants she had gathered. The doctor shook his head, his expression grave. "I'm afraid I don't know what's causing this," he said, his voice filled with frustration. "Their symptoms are unusual. It could be some kind of infection or perhaps food poisoning, but I've never seen anything quite like it." He prescribed some remedies, a mixture of herbs and tonics, hoping to alleviate their suffering. But Sarah knew that it was all in vain. The poison was too potent, too insidious. Their fate was sealed. The doctor lingered for a while, offering words of comfort and encouragement. But Sarah could see the uncertainty in his eyes, the unspoken fear that he was dealing with something beyond his understanding. As he packed up his bag, he turned to Sarah, his voice low and somber. "I'm sorry," he said. "I wish I could do more." Sarah simply nodded, her face a mask of sorrow. She watched as he rode away, disappearing over the horizon, leaving her alone with her dying family and her terrible secret. The doctor's visit had been a charade, a futile attempt to ward off the inevitable. And now, the end was drawing near. The days that followed were a blur of suffering and death. Pa was the first to succumb, his body finally giving way to the poison's relentless assault. Ma followed soon after, her last breath a ragged gasp for air. Agnes and Martha lingered for a while longer, their once vibrant faces now gaunt and hollow. Sarah watched them die, her heart a battleground of conflicting emotions. She felt a pang of guilt for the suffering she had caused, but she also felt a sense of relief that it was finally over. She had done what she had to do to survive, and now she could finally begin to heal. She tended to them as best she could, offering them water and wiping their brows. She whispered words of comfort, even though she knew they couldn't hear her. She prayed for their souls, even though she knew they had never shown her any kindness. Silas, oblivious to the true cause of their illness, was devastated by their deaths. He wept openly, his body racked with grief. Sarah held him close, offering him what little comfort she could. She knew that she could never tell him the truth, that it would destroy him. She would have to carry this burden alone for the rest of her life. As she watched her in-laws die, she couldn't help but wonder if she had made the right decision. Was there another way? Could she have escaped their clutches without resorting to such extreme measures? But then she remembered their plan to sell her, to rob her of her freedom and her dignity. She remembered their cruelty, their contempt, their utter disregard for her well-being, and she knew, with a chilling certainty, that she had had no other choice. She had done what she had to do to survive, and she would do it again if she had to. Finally, only Silas remained. He was weak and grief-stricken, but otherwise unharmed. Sarah knew she had to act fast. She couldn't risk him discovering the truth, couldn't bear to see the light die in his eyes. "Silas," she said softly, "you're sick too. I can see it. The journey, it's been too hard on you." Silas shook his head, his eyes filled with tears. "I'm all right, Sarah, just tired." But Sarah insisted. She brewed him a strong tea, laced with a mild sedative from her dwindling supply of herbs. She told him it would help him rest, help him recover from the shock of losing his family. Silas drank the tea willingly, trusting her implicitly. He was so vulnerable, so broken. Sarah felt a pang of guilt, but she quickly pushed it aside. She couldn't afford to waver now. As Silas drifted off to sleep, Sarah packed a small bag with supplies. She took what little money the family had left, enough to get her started. She wrote a note for Silas, telling him that she was leaving, that she couldn't stay, that she needed to find her own path. She knew it was a cruel and cowardly act, but she couldn't face him, couldn't explain what she had done. She slipped out of the wagon, leaving Silas sleeping soundly, oblivious to her departure. She walked away from the camp, away from the graves of her in-laws, away from her old life. She was alone in the wilderness, a woman with a dark secret and an uncertain future. But she was free, and that, she knew, was all that mattered. The sun rose, casting long shadows across the barren landscape. Sarah kept walking, her eyes fixed on the horizon, determined to build a new life for herself, a life free from betrayal and fear. She shouldered her bag and began to walk, putting as much distance as possible between herself and the burial site. The weight of her secret pressed heavily upon her, but she refused to succumb to despair. She had survived the worst, and she would not let it break her. Days turned into weeks as Sarah traveled across the vast and unforgiving landscape. She relied on her skills and knowledge to survive, foraging for food, finding water, and building shelters. She learned to trust her instincts, to be wary of strangers, and to protect herself from danger. She eventually reached a small town, a bustling hub of activity in the heart of the Wild West. She was drawn to its energy, its sense of opportunity. She knew that she could build a new life here, a life free from the shadows of her past. She found a small room to rent above a saloon, a modest but safe haven. She started working as a seamstress, using her skills to earn a living. She was quiet and reserved, keeping to herself and avoiding unnecessary attention. She didn't want anyone to know about her past, about the terrible secrets she carried. She slowly began to make friends, people who accepted her for who she was, without asking questions about where she came from. She started to feel a sense of belonging, a sense of community. She began to believe that she could truly escape her past, that she could find happiness again. But she knew that her secret would always be with her, a dark shadow lurking in the corners of her mind. She knew that one day it might catch up with her, but she refused to let it control her life. She would live each day to the fullest, embracing the present and hoping for a better future. She was Sarah, a survivor, a woman of the West, and she would not be broken. The money she had taken from the wagon, the money her in-laws had scrimped and saved for their new life in California, felt tainted, dirty. But Sarah knew she needed it to survive. It was a cruel irony, using their own funds to build a life they had tried to deny her. But she wouldn't let guilt cripple her. She would use the money wisely to create a better future for herself, a future they had tried to steal from her. She invested a portion of the money in her sewing business, buying better fabrics and a new sewing machine. She was skilled with her hands, and her talent soon attracted a loyal clientele. Women from all over town sought her out for her beautiful dresses and intricate designs. She also invested in a small plot of land on the outskirts of town. She planned to build a small house, a place she could call her own. She dreamed of planting a garden, filling it with flowers and herbs, a sanctuary where she could find peace and solace. She was careful with her spending, living frugally and saving every penny she could. She knew that she had to be prepared for anything, that her past could catch up with her at any moment. She needed to have a safety net, a way to protect herself if things went wrong. As her business thrived, but she also knew that she had earned it, that she had paid for it with her own suffering and sacrifice. She would use it to build a life of purpose and meaning, to honor the memory of the woman she had once been, the woman who had been betrayed and nearly destroyed. She would use it to create a future worthy of her survival. Years passed. Sarah, now known as Mrs. Elizabeth Blackwood, had become a pillar of the community. Her sewing business thrived, providing beautiful garments for the town's ladies and sturdy work clothes for the men. She was known for her kindness, her generosity, and her unwavering support for those in need. She volunteered at the local church, teaching sewing skills to young girls and helping to organize community events. She was a regular visitor at the town's orphanage, bringing gifts and spending time with the children. She was respected and admired by all who knew her. She had built the small house she had dreamed of, filling it with flowers and herbs. It was a sanctuary, a place where she could find peace and quiet. She often sat in her garden, surrounded by the beauty of nature, reflecting on her life and the choices she had made. The guilt of her past still haunted her, but she had learned to live with it. She believed that she had done what she had to do to survive, and she refused to let it define her. She focused on the present, on making a positive impact on the lives of those around her. She had become a mother figure to many in the town, offering guidance and support to those who needed it. She was a source of strength and inspiration, a symbol of hope and resilience. She had buried her past deep, erasing all traces of Sarah, the young woman who had been betrayed and nearly destroyed. She was Elizabeth now, a woman of substance and integrity, a respected member of the community. She had created a new identity, a new life. She had become the woman she was meant to be. She thought she was safe. She was wrong. The stranger arrived on a dusty stagecoach, his face hidden beneath the brim of a wide-brimmed hat. He was a gaunt man with piercing blue eyes and a sinister smile. He carried himself with an air of authority, as if he knew something that no one else did. He checked into the town's only hotel, a rundown establishment with creaking floors and faded wallpaper. He spent his days sitting on the porch, watching the townspeople go about their business. He seemed particularly interested in Elizabeth Blackwood. One afternoon, as Elizabeth was walking home from the church, the stranger approached her. "Mrs. Blackwood," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "May I have a word with you?" Elizabeth hesitated, her heart pounding in her chest. She had a bad feeling about this man, a sense that he knew more than he should. I don't believe I know you, she said, her voice trembling slightly. Perhaps not, the stranger replied, his smile widening. But I know you, Mrs. Blackwood. I know all about Sarah, the young woman who traveled west with her husband and his family. Elizabeth's blood ran cold. She had been found out. Her past had finally caught up with her. I don't know what you're talking about, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Oh, I think you do, the stranger said, his eyes glinting with malice. I know about the poison, Mrs. Blackwood. I know about the stew, and I know about the graves in the wilderness. Elizabeth's world began to spin. She had to get away, to protect herself. But the stranger blocked her path, his eyes fixed on her with an unwavering gaze. Don't even think about running, Mrs. Blackwood, he said. I know everything, and I'm not going anywhere. The past was here, and it was demanding payment. Elizabeth's mind raced. She had to think, to plan, to find a way out of this mess. She couldn't let this man destroy everything she had built, everything she had worked so hard to achieve. What do you want? She asked, her voice trembling but firm. The stranger smiled, a predatory glint in his eyes. I want what's rightfully mine, Mrs. Blackwood. I know about the money you took from your in-laws. I want it all. Elizabeth's heart sank. It was about the money. She should have known. I don't have that kind of money, she lied, hoping to buy herself some time. Don't play coy with me, Mrs. Blackwood, the stranger said, his voice hardening. I know you're a successful businesswoman. I know you have plenty of money. I want it all, and I want it now. Elizabeth knew she couldn't reason with this man. He was driven by greed, and he wouldn't stop until he got what he wanted. She had to find a way to outsmart him, to protect herself and her community. She could run, disappear again, start another new life. But she was tired of running. She had built a life here, a life she loved. She couldn't just abandon it, couldn't let this man take it all away from her. She had to stand her ground, to fight for what was hers. But how? She was just a simple seamstress, a woman with a dark secret. How could she possibly defeat a man like this? She knew she had to make a decision, a difficult decision that would determine her future. She could give him the money and hope he would leave her alone, or she could fight back, risking everything to protect her secret and her life. The choice was hers, and she knew that whatever she decided, the consequences would be devastating. Elizabeth knew she couldn't face the stranger in a straight fight. He was stronger, more ruthless, and he knew her secret. She had to use her wits, her knowledge of the Wild West, to outsmart him. She agreed to meet him that night at an abandoned mine on the outskirts of town, a place known for its treacherous tunnels and hidden dangers. She told him she would bring the money, but she needed time to gather it. As she prepared for the meeting, she thought back to her grandmother's teachings, remembering the lessons she had learned about survival, about the power of nature, about the importance of knowing your enemy. She gathered herbs and spices from her garden, mixing them together to create a potent concoction. She packed a small bag with supplies, including a knife, a rope, and a map of the mine. She knew that she was walking into a dangerous situation, but she was determined to be prepared for anything. That night, as she made her way to the mine, she felt a sense of calm come over her. She was no longer Sarah, the frightened young woman who had been betrayed by her in-laws. She was Elizabeth, a survivor, a woman of the West. She knew what she had to do, and she would not hesitate. She met the stranger at the entrance to the mine, her face a mask of determination. I have the money, she said, her voice firm, but I want to make sure you keep your word. I want to see you leave town, and I want to see you never come back. The stranger smiled, his eyes glinting in the moonlight. Of course, Mrs. Blackwood, he said. You have my word. He reached for the bag, but Elizabeth pulled it back. Not so fast, she said. I have a condition. You have to come inside the mine with me. I want to make sure you don't try to double-cross me. The stranger hesitated, a flicker of doubt crossing his face. But he agreed, drawn in by the lure of the money. Elizabeth led him into the mine, her heart pounding with each step. The darkness enveloped them, the air thick with the smell of dust and decay. She knew the mine well, every twist and turn, every hidden passage. The stranger, however, was disoriented, his eyes struggling to adjust to the darkness. As they ventured deeper into the mine, Elizabeth began to tell him stories of the dangers that lurked within, of cave-ins, of poisonous gases, of lost souls who had never found their way out. She watched as his confidence began to waver, his bravado replaced by a growing sense of unease. She led him to a narrow passage, a place where the air was thin and the ground was unstable. "This is where the money is hidden," she said, pointing to a dark crevice. "But be careful. This place is treacherous." The stranger hesitated, but the lure of the money was too strong to resist. He squeezed through the passage, his body brushing against the rough walls. As he reached for the bag, Elizabeth unleashed her trap. She threw a handful of dust into his face, blinding him momentarily. Then, she shoved him hard, sending him tumbling into the crevice. He fell with a scream, his body disappearing into the darkness. Elizabeth didn't wait to see what happened. She turned and fled, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew that she had to get out of the mine, to escape before he could recover. She made her way through the treacherous tunnels, relying on her knowledge of the mine to guide her. She eventually reached the entrance, emerging into the fresh air, gasping for breath. She looked back at the mine, her face a mask of grim determination. She had done what she had to do to protect herself, to protect her new life. She had outsmarted the stranger, using her wits and her knowledge of the Wild West to secure her freedom. She knew that her past would always haunt her, but she refused to let it. That she had chosen survival. The wind whispered through the trees outside her window, carrying the scent of sage and pine. It was a familiar scent, a comforting reminder of the wilderness she had left behind. She had come a long way from that dusty trail, from that wagon filled with resentment and betrayal. She had built a new life for herself, a life of peace and purpose. But she knew that her journey was far from over. The Wild West was a harsh and unforgiving place, a place where danger lurked around every corner. She would have to remain vigilant, to be prepared for anything. She would have to protect herself and her community from those who sought to harm them. She was Elizabeth Blackwood, a survivor, a woman of the West. And she would continue to fight for what was right, to defend those who could not defend themselves, to create a better world for future generations. Her past would always be a part of her, a reminder of the choices she had made, of the sacrifices she had endured, but would not define her. She would define herself. She rose from her chair, her eyes fixed on the horizon. The sun was beginning to rise, casting a golden glow over the town. It was a new day, a new beginning, and she was ready. She had faced her demons, and she had emerged victorious. She was free. She walked towards the door, her head held high, her heart filled with hope. She had done what she had to do to survive, and she would do it again if she had to, for she was Elizabeth Blackwood, a woman of the West, a survivor, and a force to be reckoned with. Her choices, though difficult, had paved the way for a future she would forge with her own hands, forever marked but never broken.